Thanks, Sean. This webinar. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for tuning into the webinar today. Just looking at the list of people, we've got nearly 70 people on the line, which is great. I hope that we're going to have some good information to share for you, and there will be ample time at the end to ask questions, and hopefully we can get everybody's questions answered. This is the first webinar in a series of 3 webinars focused on the relationship between the state soil scientists and the Soil Science Division, with a focus on how we can work better together. In these times of short budgets and decreasing staff, it is vitally important, and more important than it ever has been, for us to work together as a team as the soil scientists and related scientists in the agency to provide the support for agency activities that is needed for helping people help the land, as the old motto used to say. I still like that one better than the new one. Today, in the first part of our webinar series, we're going to talk about the money, because unfortunately it often comes down to the money. Fortunately, we have the right person for the job, and that person is Dr. Pam Thomas. Many of you have met Pam along the way. She was the longtime state soil scientist in South Carolina before taking the plunge and moving up into her current position as Associate Director for the Soils Program. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Pam. Pam?
Thank you, Dr. R. I hope everyone can hear me. My voice is a little scratchy today. If the animation is showing up on the PowerPoint, you see the little dude or dudette kind of wobbling around there. That's kind of what managing a budget is like, being your own personal household budget, or a budget in your state or a headquarters or wherever. You just hope you don't fall off the seesaw. That's your goal, and that's going to be our goal as we go through, not just this presentation, but through, budget management. Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time just basically talking about, the federal budget process and how the money eventually ends up in your pocket. And then once you do receive the funds, kind of what the expectations are for you as a state soil scientist to manage your allocation of funds that you receive. So pretty much we're just going to be doing a follow the money tour for the next 30 minutes or so. Before we really plunge into it, let me just give you a couple of definitions, because I'm going to be using them, interchangeably back and forth. In the federal government, or in lots of governments, there are 2 basically types of funds. There's the discretionary fund and the mandatory fund. The discretionary fund is the annual appropriations process that Congress goes through to do the federal budget. This is why we end up with CRs and so on and so forth. The mandatory funding is spending that Congress does kind of outside of the annual process through special legislation, such as Social Security, Medicare, and for us in NRCS, the Farm Bill is a mandatory program. The federal budget process, it's a year. Actually, it's usually a 2-year process, but you hope you can get it done in a year. It's a 5-step process that starts in February, when the President delivers their budget to Congress, and there are 2 pre-steps before the President actually delivers the budget to Congress, and that starts back in the summer or around September, when agencies submit their budget to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and there's a lot of back and forth for several months to make sure that what the agencies are fits within what the President's budget expectations are. And once that happens, after 3 or 4 months, then the President finally has the document to deliver to Congress. So once Congress receives that budget, and again, we're talking discretionary budget at this time, it goes to both House and Senate committees. There are 12 of them, because there are 12 separate appropriation bills that go through Congress. They spend time working within their committees to do a budget resolution. And once that's decided, then it goes to the Appropriations Committee. Now, these are the folks in Congress that are, you know, if you want a good friend, make a friend with an appropriations person in Congress, because they hold the power of the purse, quite literally. So they take what the authorization committees have done, and then they you know, do a little bit more tweaking with the budget. And again, there's a lot of back and forth that goes on, not just between you know, different committees, but also between the House and the Senate. And once that is done and they come to an agreement, it goes to the floor for a vote on both parts of Congress, the House and the Senate. If they approve it, then it goes to the President, and then the President signs the budget into law. Now, just a comment, I can't, you know, does anybody know when the last time we actually got a budget passed on by October 1? 1997. That was the last time we actually got our money at the first of the fiscal year. Every year since then, what's that been? 30 years? 30 years that we have been, 20. Thank you. Sorry, math, you know, I'm a budget person. Math is not my strong suit. So for 20 years, we've been under a CR at the beginning of every federal year. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay, so the President signs the budget. Does that mean that we get our budget, we get our money the next day? Well, of course not. It's not that simple. So the President signs the budget, and then it goes back to the Office of Management and Budget, because they need to make sure that what was passed by Congress fits within what the administration wants to do. So they check that. If it doesn't, then it might go back to Congress for some tweaking. So once all that happens and OMB is satisfied, then they pass the budget down to the various departments. So USDA gets the budget, and then USDA takes it to make sure that the appropriation meets what the department wants to do. So again, if it doesn't exactly, then they have to go back to OMB to do a little negotiating, but eventually it comes down to NRCS. And finally, when it gets down to NRCS, you know, our budget folks and our program folks have to make sure that the appropriation meets our agency policies. And again, you hope that happens quickly and there's not too much back and forth. But once that's all done, finally, then the allocations, the actual funds, actually get distributed to state conservationists and deputy chiefs, who are the allowance holders, which means they are the people who are responsible for the funds, legally responsible for the funds. So it could take anywhere up to 3 months to actually get from the time the budget passes, the President signs the budget, to it actually gets into our accounts where we can actually use the funds. You know, part of the reason the budget didn't pass in FY17 till like February, and I think it was May or June before we actually received our allocation. That's and again, that's why we have it's always a rush at the end of the year to try to use those funds. Okay, so before we can spend the funds, the government has to get funds. So where do they come from? Well, the majority of the funds come from your income taxes that you pay in every year. Another small portion is corporate taxes that are paid by businesses. There's also payroll taxes, which you know come out of, you see it on your pay stubs. It comes out of your paycheck for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Payroll taxes are off limits to the discretionary part of the budget. Those payroll taxes go directly to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's also excise taxes, which are your luxury taxes, your taxes on luxury items, gas taxes, you have customs taxes for imports that are coming into the country, and then there's some other fees that various agencies charge, such as passport fees or getting into national parks. Those fees typically go back to the agency that is collecting the fees or asking for the fees. So those aren't available for the discretionary budget either. So it's only income taxes and corporate taxes which are available for discretionary funding. So that's, that's not a whole lot. So in FY16, the federal government took in $3.276 trillion dollars. And a trillion is a million, if you want to know how many zeros that is. So that's how much that came in. So where the money goes, how we spend it. This slide is just kind of a quick depiction on the various pots of money. On the kind of the left side of the pie, you see all the mandatory spending. Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare take up over 50% of the federal spending. That's where it goes. There's another 8% in mandatory. That's for retirement and federal veterans benefits, for SNAP, or what used to be known as food stamps. Also, our NRCS Farm Bill funds are included in that other category. 6% of the budget goes towards paying off the interest, which goes up every single year, interest on the debt. And then there is less than 20% of the total federal budget goes towards discretionary spending. Of that, over half goes to the military to spend. So that leaves the non-military discretionary part to fund the rest of the federal government, which is us. It pays for veterans' medical care, EPA, NASA, transportation, education, any research that is done in the federal government. All of that is funded off of that 14% of the allocation. So drilling down just a little bit farther, looking at NRCS, at least 2/3 of what we get in our budget goes towards Farm Bill programs. Of that, the bulk of that is actually financial assistance, and those are monies that we cost share with landowners to install conservation practices, and also to obtain easements for wetland reserve program and the grasslands reserve program. A small portion of the Farm Bill funding, pays its technical assistance. The TA pays for the staff that do those activities. But that leaves only 20% to do conservation operations. And conservation operations is what most of us here on the phone today do. I would say that's probably 95% of what we do. The biggest portion of that is conservation technical assistance, CTA funds, and CTA, this is what this agency is all about, is doing conservation technical assistance. The soil survey program gets 2% of that conservation operation funding, and then you got snow survey, and the plant materials centers get a very small portion of that. So if you look at the numbers, the soil survey program, we get only 0.0002% of the federal budget, but we all know that is the most important part of the federal budget, so we've got to take those funds and use them wisely. Okay, so we have revenue. So we took in $3.276 trillion in FY16. We spent $3.876 trillion, which means we had a deficit in FY16 of basically $600 billion. So that's, that's an annual deficit. We've had annual deficits. We've been in a deficit scenario the last 45 out of the last 50 years. You take all of those deficits and add them up, and that is the federal debt. The federal debt is, I can't remember what it is right now off the top of my head, $28 trillion or something like that. There's a really cool website. If you type in federal debt, you can go to this calculator or this scroll. You can watch the federal debt increase. The federal debt increases at a rate of $8,000 per second. It's pretty actually incredible to sit and watch those numbers just kind of flip by. Now, just to summarize all of that, and we're looking at the spending, there's basically 5 pots of money in the federal government. You've got Social Security and the health care, which makes up over half. You've got the military, which probably makes up another third. You've got the interest on the federal debt. And we fall in the everything else piece of the pie. And as far as NRCS is concerned, and that everything else, we're basically a crumb. We're not even a whole partial slice of the pie. We just, if you just want to visualize it, we are a crumb. Crumbs are good, though. So, over the next 20 years, the federal budget, this is just kind of shows you what, economists, where they think the budget is going to be going, the costs for the mandatory programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the interest on the federal debt are just going to keep going up. And at some point in time, you in order to sort of kind of keep it under control, something's got to give. And the first thing that gives is the discretionary funding. Everything else that doesn't fit into those other pots. And if you look at our soil survey program, our Co2 allocation, which CO stands for Conservation Operations, basically our soil funding. Since the allocation actually increased pretty good from 1980 up till about 2012. Our staff levels, though, in the same amount of time have been decreasing. We take some big jumps and we level out, and we take another big jump down. 2011, the soil survey budget got cut 15% in 1 year, and that's when we had the last realignment. That's when we ended up closing offices and moving folks to other offices. We did a Vera VSIP, so some folks took retirement, but that was the direct result of that 15% budget cut. That other big dip that you see is when we had sequestration in 2014, I think, and then it went back up. We've been level funded at $80 million for a couple of years, but that is projected to decrease over the next few years, and we're going to get into that in just a second. Okay, now looking at our current federal fiscal year, FY18, and then looking at the President's budget. And, we are, as USDA, we are part of the executive branch, and as such, we follow the President's budget. So this is what we have to plan off of. We've got to plan off of what the President submitted to Congress, and then once Congress does their thing, then we'll work on what, actually gets signed into law. But for planning purposes, if you look at this, you can see, and again, this has been in the news, EPA projected to take over a 30% cut. USDA is right behind at over a 20% cut. And the scary part of that is that in the original, before the budget got submitted, there was a lot of discussion about eliminating the CTA program. in USDA, which is us, NRCS. Thinking that the private sector can do the job. You don't need the federal government to help farmers do conservation. I think luckily from what has actually been submitted in the budget that is not going to happen right away, but there will be some cuts. All right, let's bring this down to NRCS, and these are the actual numbers that are in the President's budget. So FY17 for conservation operations, which includes, CTA plus CDSI, the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative, Snow Survey, Plant Material Centers, and some other funds, at about $784 million. We were funded, and again, soils was just slightly over $80 million. FY18, the drop in funding for conservation operations will drop by 12% down to $686 million. Again, projected, not actuals yet. Soil survey we're taking a much smaller cut, only going down a little over about 1.5%. But overall, between the two, there's about a 10% expected budget decrease in conservation operations funding. FY19, there's going to be further cuts. So overall, by the time we get to FY19, we're looking at a 20% cut in CTA, again, possible cut, about 6% in the soil survey program, so overall around a 15% budget reduction. So these are the realities that we are living with and we're having to plan for. And everybody that's listening to this is this is going to affect all of us. And we're trying to be we're trying to get ahead of the curve and plan so we can make good decisions and try to keep the field, which includes states and state soil scientists and resource soil scientists. You're still a key focus. Okay, so mentioned earlier that we've been in a CR since started the fiscal year with a CR since 1997. No different this year. We're in a CR that runs through December the 8th. So the way funding goes, so if you want to know why you don't get your entire allocation in the fall, this is why. It's because we're in a CR. You're only going to get 18.9% of your allocation because that's how long the CR lasts, 18.9% of the year. And so there are various funding periods that go through. So as we get funding, then more funding goes out to the various entities, the states and the above states. And if FY18 goes like with FY17, yeah, we'll finish the CR. Congress will still not have passed the budget, and then we'll have a second CR. And then, they actually got close to passing the budget. They weren't quite there, so we had an extension of 30 days. It's just called a 30-day allocation. At some point in time, Congress kind of, they kind of throw their hands up and said, all right, that's it. We can't come to a decision. We're going to fund all 12 appropriation bills with one bill. That's called an Omnibus Bill when they do that. And again, that's, then you do that, then it goes through the gyrations that going through OMB, USDA, NRCS, and then finally we get the rest of our full year budget, which tends to be, half of your budget comes with 3 months left in the fiscal year to go. Okay, so what does this all mean for state soil scientists? So this is strictly talking about the CO2 program, the soil survey funding. States are funded at a GS13 step 5 level, adjusted for locality pay with 30.8% benefits added. And that's what states receive for salary. Now there's California and Texas, their state soil scientists are GS-14, so they get GS-14 salary. States that don't have a state soil scientist, but might have an assistant state soil scientist, or they share with another state, get funded at GS-12, Step 5. The support you get for travel, buying supplies and equipment, that level is determined by agency leadership. It's actually not determined by us in the division. So last year, they told us what it was, and it came out to be 10.81% support of your salary, and so that's what you receive. So, for example, last year, a state soil scientist that's in the rest of the U.S. locality area received just a little over $10,000 for support. Now, of that $10,000 and of that salary money, that you may not actually get all of that, because the states do take a portion out for 64T, basically for overhead, to pay for some things that are commonly used amongst everybody in the state, buying pens and pencils and things like that, paying for utilities here and there. So it behooves you to go to your financial resources specialist or your assistant for management and strategy and ask them, how much of our allocation, soils allocation, is going towards 64T, and how much do I actually have to use for myself. That's not information we can give you from the headquarters level, because that's managed by the state. Okay, so you as the program manager for the soils funds in your state or territory, what are your responsibilities? Those of you who have been around for a while, probably know these responsibilities pretty well, but we may have, we have quite a few, new state soil scientists that may not know everything that kind of comes with this allocation. Most importantly, we would like for you to attend the NCSS regional or national conference. So we have regional conferences in odd years, and we have national conferences in, no, I said that backwards. We have regional conferences in even years and national conferences in odd years. This year are the regional conferences, the West Conference, so you can go ahead and get this on your calendar. The West Conference is the week of May 21st in Tucson, Arizona, hosted by the University of Arizona. Northeast and South are having a joint conference the week of June the 25th in Summersville, West Virginia, co-hosted by West Virginia University and the Forest Service. The North Central Conference is in Brookings, South Dakota, the week of July the 9th, and is hosted by South Dakota State University. The National Conference in 2019 will be in Rhode Island. We haven't, of course, set up dates for that yet, but it'll be sometime in the summer, I would guess. So it would be great if you go to your boss, your state con, or your director, and say, hey, listen, I received $10,000 in support funding. I would like to have 1,500 of it or so to go to this conference. Do that up front. Just get that commitment so that you can go ahead and plan to go to the conference. Another responsibility for state soil scientists is hosting an annual NCSS meeting with your local and state partners. Most everyone does that, and again, thank each and every one of you who invites us from headquarters to participate in our regional folks. Those meetings are your meetings. You can do whatever you want to do. You can have a planning meeting for the next year. You can have specific meetings that address a specific interest of you in your state, be it ecological sites or you do subaqueous mapping, whatever it is that is important to you in your state. And if you send us the dates and locations, we'll post them in the weekly update, the Soil Science Division weekly update, and then we can also, once it's over with, write it up. And again, we'll put that in a weekly update so everybody can know what's going on in your state. Probably your most important job in the state as a state soil scientist is that you are the leader for technical soil services in your state. I'm not going to get into that because that's going to be highlighted in 2 weeks with the third webinar in this series, and we'll address that in great detail in a couple weeks. Another thing, please participate in the Soil Science Division project reviews that go on. It's your opportunity to get out and meet the regional and local soil survey office staff, a chance to get out of the office into the field, which is always a good thing, because it's good for you to go because they may be looking at, changing things in a database that are going to affect programs in your state. A change is, for example, going in and they're going to change a depth to a restrictive layer. And that influences lots of things, hydrologic shore groups, and the next thing you know, which influences runoff curve numbers. Next thing you know, you got your state engineer in your office said, "What have you done? Why did you change this number?" Well, you can at least be part of the conversation and explain that we're delivering better data. And there's a lot of other items in the database that change that affect use of management. Okay, so continuing on. It's important for you to communicate your state priorities to the Soil Science Division, to our 12 regional directors. These need to be, in order for this process to work, we have to have, it's got to be continuous two-way discussions. You are, as a state soil scientist, part of the management teams for each of the regions. And if you haven't heard from a regional director about, an upcoming management team meeting, pick up the phone, send an email, say, "Hey, I'm ready. When's the meeting? Let's get it on the calendar." Also, opportunity to participate in the Soils 2026 focus teams. You may not know much about those, but next week's webinar will go into some more detail about these focus teams. We have them for the database, initial mapping, digital soil mapping, research. I mean, there's 12 or 13 different focus teams that you can participate in. So one item I know that's near and dear to your heart these past few weeks is the annual refresh. Review that data and make sure the change in the data is not going to adversely impact programs in your state. Again, this part of this two-way communication process. If you don't talk, you're not going to know. Developing soil interpretations for local uses. To me, this is one of my favorite parts of the job. I really enjoyed doing that. You got lots of local uses that a national interp doesn't exactly fit. If you have vineyards, you can adjust them to your local septic tank absorption field state regs. All kinds of stuff. Up in Alaska, moose habitat. In the West, with all the fires they had this past fire season, fire affects a lot of soil property, so you can do an interpretation for that. You also need to update and maintain all of the databases in the state that use soils information. Russell 2 is probably the primary one, but you also have WinPST. Keeping the ePhotog up to date, the Field Office Technical Guide. Working with FSA on rental rates, working with FSA on CRP, LISA issues, the never-ending list of things to keep up with. And again, as a member of your state leadership team, you are, well, in most states, you may not be, most states you are part of the quality review team for going out to look at field offices. Go out and check out the 6-part folders, make sure the soils information is in there, and and not only that the soils information is in there, is that are they actually using it? They said, do you know what this means when you're trying to install, a fence or a heavy use area, or you're putting in a riparian buffer? Asking questions and make sure they understand, the conservation planners understand the perils and pitfalls of soils information and how it can help them with conservation planning. And this is always, again, state soil scientist job to me is one of the best jobs in the agency. It's a fantastic job, and this is the fun stuff. You are the soils expert in your state, so you provide any expertise you can give to conservation programs, conservation practice standards, rankings for EQIP, or for practice standards, or ranking programs for not EQIP practice standards, but for EQIP. You also assist users in understanding soil survey information and how to use it properly. Do all the soils training for your state area. And market soil survey as best you can. There's some great examples out there of state soil scientists who are doing this very well. Again, I think we'll also be touching on that in a couple of weeks. Okay, so that's pretty much the presentation. Just realize that, the folks on this phone call, we are the soils team for NRCS. But it doesn't matter whether we're paid for by a state allocation or paid for out of a headquarters allocation or a center allocation. We do provide the soils expertise, and we need to work together. And again, you have funding that comes to your state. Advocate for it. Ask. Ask, plan. Say, I have these plans for using this fund. I want to go on field reviews. I want to go to these meetings. And again, it's a two-way street. We've got to keep the lines of communication open all directions. It may not just be a two-way street. It may be a four-way intersection. We just got to keep the communication going. So that's all I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can. Again, I don't want you to get, don't get too depressed with budget decreases. I mean, it's, every time we get a pay increase, they increase the amount they take out of your paycheck for health benefits. Kind of think of it like that. We'll make adjustments. We'll make it work. Don't worry about it. But we're here for you. Again, I was a state soil scientist. I have your back. Still think you guys do fantastic stuff, and please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. Okay, Sean, thank you.
All right, thanks, Pam. We'll give people a chance to compose their thoughts and a question there in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'll get it started off. I have a question for you. So you talked about support costs being at 10.81% for this past year. But can that money also be used by other staff that are doing tech soil services kinds of things? So in other words, like a resource soil scientist?
Absolutely. Very good question, Sean. Absolutely, a resource soil scientist can use that. It's not limited to just the state soil scientist. Please tap into that.
All right. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. So one question is, how you talked about the overall federal budget, and the question is, how do natural disasters fit into this, and is it hard to predict with hurricanes and et cetera? Where do natural disasters come out of the budget at?
Most natural disasters, like the 3 hurricanes we just had, Congress will appropriate additional funds for those natural disasters, and those will come to the agency by way of various programs. The EWP, the Emergency Watershed Program, is one. We've got a lot of folks working with FEMA who are on detail with FEMA, working in Texas and Louisiana and Florida and Puerto Rico. So yeah, those funds don't generally come directly out of our budget, but there are funds that are available to us to tap into. There's been a couple of national bulletins that's come out in regards to that, as how you can use those funds for the hurricanes.
All right. Another question, is the funding from the division part of the current CR, or will it come piecemeal through all the years of allocations?
So, so the funding it'll come from the current CR. So CRs are based on the funds that were allocated in FY17. So the 18.9% or 19.2% that we get is based on the FY17 allocation. So those should be forthcoming in the next week or two. And if that answers your question. And then if we happen to have a second CR, then again, it'll still be based on FY17. You don't actually get our FY18 money until Congress actually passes the budget.
All right. Any other questions out there? So another one is, obviously we see the value in what we do. Soils and conservation are so important, but do the purse holders do? Do they understand what we do?
Some do. Some do, but not enough do. And this is part of the emphasis on marketing the program and providing training and working with outside groups so they can understand that their life and lots of times their livelihoods depend on soil. One of our focus teams is an outreach team. It's going to be working on getting the message out to more folks. But, just in your state, talking to the soil cons and the agronomists, and, they understand it's important, but, never hurts to just drive that point home as often as you can. Mike, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, let me just jump in with that. I think the other thing, I would just echo what Pam said, and you are, as the state soil scientist and your staff, and I'll broadly define them, whether the resource soil scientists report to you or not, or if you even have them, but you are the face of soils in the agency. Pam and I and Dave and all of us at the national level, do what we can to pound on the table for soils up here in the big ugly building on 12th and Independence, but it's you folks who are out there in the field, and you're the folks who are working with those local people. And I was, one of the states, I don't even know the whole story, but somehow they ended up, the state senator is very interested now in soils, and I think they ended up making a profile for her office because of a random interaction that she had with some soils people at a public event, and it struck a nerve, it struck a chord, and she's become one of our biggest vocal advocates at the national level. It's serendipitous that way, and so the more that you can be out there, that your staff can be out there, spreading the word about the cool stuff that's going on and why this is important. We need all the voices we can get, and as Pam said, it doesn't matter where you hang your hat or who's paying your check, whether it's it's still all coming out of the agency budget. It's still all part of the soils profession, and the more we can all chip in, the better chance we've got of something sticking. So, keep up the great work out there. I know a lot of you are doing some amazing stuff, and keep it up.
Yeah, we got some more questions that have come in.
I'll have Sean check the board here.
So, some states, the state soil scientists are responsible for completing the NRI. How is that funding delivered to states, and what leeway do they have to use those funds?
And the infamous NRI money. NRI money is actually 01 money. It's another piece of money when you're having that conversation with your assistant for management and strategy, or whatever they call them these days, about your budget. That's another thing you ought to ask about, because NRI does come as a separate chunk of money. It comes under 01. Why is anybody's guess? Just don't ask. But But it is a chunk of money, and if you are doing NRI activities, you need to make sure that you're aware of those funds, again, as your responsibility as the program manager for that program. You need to be aware of those funds. How much are they? It used to be a fairly significant chunk of change. I think it isn't anymore. But it's another little chunk of money that you may have to help you do your job. Now, those funds are focused completely on NRI, but they are O1 funds, and your state conservationist is the allowance holder. So it's important. That's why it's important for you to have that discussion with your state conservationist about your priorities, important activities, so that you're in the mix in that conversation when budgets start getting parsed out.
Well, Pam, there's a question here about how the division is going to meet the budget cuts for this fiscal year, and is there a plan being worked on? Can you tell the audience something about that, some of the ideas, or what the status is?
Sure. So the agency is going to have an FTE cap, which is a staffing cap, how many positions we can have. I think we can meet most of our budget reduction by not filling. We're not going to be able to fill as many positions, so we're just going to fill some key positions, and we'll have to leave some others not filled. We're hoping not to reduce the support funds, which includes support funds to the state soil scientists. But yeah, we are working on a plan. We've got plans for 5 and 10, 15, 20% budget cuts to take us through the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of it will be done with attrition, though, unfortunately. But with an FTE cap, we can only do so much.
And then maybe one last question: are there any cautions or restrictions on marketing directly to lawmakers?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Pam.
We cannot do that.
Yeah.
No.
With the issue of lawmakers and things like that, you do need to be very careful. There is a prohibition, a explicit federal prohibition on federal employees lobbying. However, that doesn't mean that if the local representative shows up at your Envirothon, that you can't share soils information with them. You don't bluntly ask them to support the NRCS budget, but do show that you are an NRCS employee who is providing a valuable public service, and let them put 2 and 2 together. Yeah, that is a dangerous, slippery slope, and if you have any questions along those lines that you think you might be getting toward that edge, talk to your state conservationist, and if necessary, they'll get you in touch with the USDA ethics office. You do want to be very careful on that one. I did notice another thing from a question on the board here about videos and things. I know the outreach team is looking at any and all options. There are other folks there are some state soil scientists who have done some really neat stuff already. One of the things that that a number of people are doing, and this is something that we probably won't get to on this webinar series, but is something just to bring up now since the question was asked, is one of the opportunities in your state is to work with your public affairs specialist. Every state has one. And oftentimes, in many states, public affairs specialists are looking for things to do. And so your public affairs specialist may be more than happy to help you put together a soils of your state fact sheet, or a little YouTube video, or a program for your cooperators meeting, or things like that. That's something when I was state soil scientist, never thought to take advantage of that, but I've seen some wonderful products that have come out since I've been in this position at the national level from states who have taken advantage of that. So think broadly, think creatively, work with folks, and do what keep up. Like I say, all I can say, and I think I speak for Pam, and Dave Limbo's listening in here as well, that our role here at the national level is to help you folks do your jobs. And you're the folks who are where the rubber hits the road in the agency. working with those field people, working with our cooperators on a daily basis. And, we want to, it's an important job. It's a key job. We're here to help you. We're here to help provide the support so you can get that job done.
Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you, Mike, for your time and effort to make this presentation. And thanks to all the participants for joining in. We had more than 150 people join today's webinar. The on-demand recording of this webinar will be available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a couple of days. So feel free to let your colleagues know about this training opportunity, and be sure to tune in for next week's October 12th part of this three-part webinar series working with the National Soil Survey Center. Thanks all.